Behind the Brand features the people who are making things happen. Get the insight to grow your biz from experts who've done it. Get behind the brand.
Hi, I'm Bryan Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Today I'm here with SVP at Ogilvy and author of the book Likeonomics, Rohit Bhargava. Rohit, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I usually ask my guests, Rohit, how did you get this job?
You know, my big start in marketing, I think, was by picking up and leaving America and going to Australia. So that's sort of where my story starts. And it was this moment after graduating from school when I was kind of sure what I wanted to do, but wasn't really sure how to start doing it. And I figured, well, if I'm going to start brand new, I may as well start brand new somewhere else. And that's what I did. And I moved to Australia, and I literally lived in a hostel for a couple weeks and just searched for a job. And I found a 3-week gig doing HTML coding. And that's how I started. So, you know, not that I wanted to be a programmer, but the big thing I learned was you take the opportunity that's in front of you,
Sure.
and not necessarily the one that you're waiting for, because that can lead to something. And so in my case, it did.
That's great. And then what happened from there?
So I got a job as a project manager in the online world, but we had a great way of titling that, because in the online world we called ourselves producers, which was very cool because the career progression path was to what I think is probably the coolest title I'll ever have in my life, which is executive producer. What a cool title.
Yes.
And so that's how I started in the online world, launching huge websites in Australia. Then I worked for an ad agency, Leo Burnett, in Australia. And then eventually in 2003 I decided I wanted to come back to America. Came back to the U.S. And moved to D.C. And as an ad guy in D.C., I had to figure out, okay, now what am I going to do? Because there's not really that many ad agencies in D.C. They're all in New York.
Right.
So I decided to make the switch to PR and found and basically just literally went through the yellow pages at that time. I mean, this was way back, right? Went through the yellow pages and found what the biggest agencies in D.C. were. And I phoned up their receptionist, and I said, who runs your online team? Found out the name of the guy, and I sent him an email, and I said, hey, I just moved here from Australia.
Cold call.
Cold call, totally. Yeah, cold email.
Yeah.
Not even.
Yeah.
And that's how I got my first job with Ogilvy in D.C., and that was 8 years ago. I'm still there.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You went after it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just, there may not be an opening, right? So you just kind of take a shot, and sometimes it works. Sometimes the timing is good.
And so tell us how you ended up from an ad guy into an author. Likeonomics isn't your first book. Tell us about your first book a little bit for those who may not have read it yet.
Yeah, so the first book was called Personality Not Included, and it was sort of like batteries not included. Like, you need this, but nobody gives it to you.
Right.
And it was sort of the book that I always wanted to write, and I've always been a writer.
Yeah.
So the writing part of doing that and writing a book wasn't a foreign idea for me. I mean, I had an English degree, I'd written screenplays before, and like poetry and just random stuff.
Yeah.
So,
which is totally contrary to the stereotype of a producer, someone who's writing code, shut in, introvert, not super social, lacking in some of the etiquette,
Yeah.
But
No, that's right. I mean, I think, I sort of realized this early on, because being a South Asian guy, a lot of times family pressure sort of drives you towards something more technical, or being a doctor or an engineer, and a lot of my friends are in that same situation where that's where they were headed.
Well, I'm interested because I think a lot of this stuff, you're talking about nurture stuff versus nature, but I think a lot of this is hardwired. And so I'm curious, because your mind works maybe in an analytical way, you're able to write code, and maybe you're creative because you can design things as well, but the fact that you've got a personality included as well, I think is kind of unique.
I think, people are good at different things, and I realized pretty quickly, actually when I was 16 years old, that my future wasn't necessarily going to be in engineering, because I spent the summer going to an engineering camp, and I did that for 4 weeks. And at the end of those 4 weeks, I realized two things. One was that I wasn't cut out to be an engineer, because all of these 16-year-olds were way smarter than I was, and I couldn't keep up, and my team basically abandoned me after like day 2. They were like, you're not going to be able to help us. The other thing I realized was, because I got abandoned by my team, I spent the next 3 weeks just hanging out with everybody.
Yeah.
And at the end of those 3 weeks, I won what they called at the time, this was all boys, by the way, at the time they called it the Good Citizen Award. It was only a couple years later that I realized what that meant, which was basically that I won Miss Congeniality
Yeah.
at an engineering camp.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew maybe engineering wasn't the thing for me.
So, I mean, you mentioned some important things. I know the people who are watching this show, they're entrepreneurs, they're small business people, they're other marketers trying to put the puzzle together. Focusing on your strengths. You said, you figured out what you're good at. What are some of the things that you're good at?
I think one of the things that I found that I was really good at was taking something that seems really complicated and explaining it to someone in a way that they get. And it is maybe part of what salespeople do. So it is partially sort of a sales idea, but it's just this ability to take what most people aren't able to describe and describe it. And that was really important because, first of all, I don't think there's enough of that in the world. And second of all, I think that the reason why I believe I believe in the power of marketing, because there's a lot of bad marketing too, right? I mean, we convince people to eat stuff that isn't healthy for them or have a bad self-image. I mean, there's bad marketing too.
Yeah.
But I believe that the power of marketing is that we can take these world-changing ideas, often created by people who aren't able to communicate it, but still have the world-changing idea, and pair it together with someone who gets the marketing and who gets the communication, then you change the world. It's not the idea itself that'll just change the world. This is why world-changing ideas die. They die because of bad marketing. So you need to put both together.
So you found out that you're able to simplify concepts, you're able to communicate things in a way that it's easy to understand for other people, and then how did you parlay that into success in what you were doing?
I think one of the first things I realized was that is what good marketing is. And so I was in the right field, because marketing ultimately is about influence. And the only way you can influence someone is by explaining something in a way that they get and that's relevant for them. And so part of what I realized was that I could do that. The other part was that I didn't just want to work on one thing, and this is where the agency part comes in. The reason I work at an agency and why I love what I do is because I get to work on a lot of different things. I mean, I had 1 week, and I remember because I was describing it to somebody, I had a week last year where I, in the same week, participated in an event to talk about how digital could change lives in Africa, how the FDA was going to regulate social media, and how to work on a marketing program to convince B2B managers to upgrade their technology to the next enterprise platform. Totally different, all in 1 week. And that's what I love about the chance to do what I do, that because you work on so many different things, now I can go to any event and I can talk to anyone about what they do. And it's not about me, because I know something about what they do. And that's really cool. That's really powerful.
Yeah. Talk to us about some of the things that you're doing at Ogilvy. And let's approach it from a standpoint of, what can we teach? What insights can we gain from you about some of the campaigns or some of the marketing that you've done? What are you proud of that you've done recently?
First of all, the team at Ogilvy that I had the chance to be part of in 2004 launched our social media group. So that's way early for a big agency to say social media is going to be really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I'm personally really proud of, and I know that our team is proud of, the fact that we were out there very early. We weren't a Me Too kind of, oh my gosh, everybody else is doing this, we better do it too.
Right.
We were very early to the game.
This is still when MySpace was popular, and
Facebook wasn't open to everybody, and there was no Twitter, and
thinking about outside of college.
Yeah. It was very early. And I think the side benefit of that is, for me personally at least, that's when I started blogging also. That was really powerful for me, because starting that early, I was part of this fraternity of bloggers who were talking about marketing, and we were a very small community then, and now it just kind of exploded.
Right.
But over time, you start to build an audience, and you start to be around longer, and so people know you because of that. And that was huge for my personal brand, and in a lot of ways, that's what led to the book deal, because I had the blog and I had the audience.
Oh, let's fast forward to today. What do you think about blogging today? It's sort of gone through an evolution. Is it going away? Is it here to stay? Is it still viable?
I think the nice thing about blogging today is the people who are still actively blogging today, or who have good blogs, are people who are good writers. And that wasn't the case in 2004. Anybody who had a profile had a blog. And a lot of them were crap writers.
Right.
But they just had a blog because that was how they had their personal platform. And now a lot of those people have said, you know what? I'm not necessarily that good at writing. And so I'm going to start to create videos because I'm better at that. I'm going to do audio podcasts because I'm better at that. I'm going to do events instead. I'm going to use Twitter instead. And so a lot of those people who writing wasn't their thing have sort of gone away.
Right.
Which is really good, I think, because now you know that you're going to get a longer take. And there's a lot of people who are talking about, like, what has Twitter done to your blogging?
Sure.
And for me, and for a lot of bloggers I know, Twitter has enabled me to push out the small things. So now my blog posts have actually gotten longer, and they've gotten more in depth.
Interesting.
And I blog less frequently. And that is because I have, I only blog when I have something bigger that I want to say. Otherwise, I'll just shoot a tweet out and link to something.
Interesting. What are some of the blogs that you read? Or do you read other people's blogs? Who do you think's doing it well?
I think that Mitch Joel is a guy that I always look at because he's got a very personal take on why he does what he does.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a great guy. And I think a lot of the people who I end up reading blogs from are people who I know personally. And there's an interesting side lesson, I think, in that because, and that's sort of what I've written about, this humanity of we connect with people that we know, that we like. The blogging part is one aspect of that I relate more to these blogs of these guys because I know we've had drinks together, we've hung out, I know them, I know their lives, and so when they write about something, I'm more inclined to read that and more inclined to actually internalize it, and I'll find it. So that's one part of how I read blogs. The other part is based on just searching and finding things. So a lot of times people will tweet something, or I'll be searching for some information, I'll land on a blog, and so it's stumbling, basically.
Yeah. Let's talk about marketing ideas and why they die. Let's go back to that for a second. So expound on that a little bit.
Well, I think one of the examples that I wrote about, and I love this example, is of the keyboard. And when the keyboard was originally invented in the early 1900s, the QWERTY keyboard that we all use, it was invented for a single purpose, and that was to slow us all down because we were typing too fast. And typewriters, when they used typewriters, used to get stuck. And so they created the QWERTY keyboard to be unoptimized. They put the most commonly used letters farther apart. They made you use your pinkies, which is very uncomfortable.
Right.
And they tried to slow people down.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So in the 1960s, a guy named August Dvorak says, well, this is completely unoptimized. I'm an engineer. I'm going to fix this.
Yep.
He creates the Dvorak keyboard through a foundation grant from, I think, the Carnegie Foundation. And he launches that, and he goes to a woman named Barbara Blackburn, and he helps her learn how to use the keyboard. And she sets the Guinness Book of World Records record for fastest typing, 212 words per minute.
Wow.
Amazing speed.
Yeah.
So they launch this. It's clearly optimized, it's clearly better, and it has a complete failure. And the complete failure was for multiple reasons. One of the reasons was communication. The other reason was because they underestimated how much people had already learned how to use the previous model.
The status quo.
The status quo,
Yeah, they're stuck.
And the people had invested their time.
Yeah.
Right. And I like that example because it kind of shows that there are a lot of these ideas that come up. And they fail for multiple reasons. And sometimes the reason is marketing. They just couldn't tell enough people about it, or the right people about it. And sometimes it's just, they didn't understand what people's real barriers were. And they thought that the best idea is going to win. And I don't think we live in a world where the best idea wins. I think we live in a world where the right idea at the right time that connects the right people always wins beyond whatever the better idea is. And I've had this situation in marketing, pitching for clients, and this is the story that I open the book with, where I lost an account even though we had the perfect idea, the perfect pitch, the perfect everything. And I lost because of chemistry, team chemistry. And that happens all the time.
So tell me about that experience.
Well, it was, you walk in and you have this moment where anybody who's had to pitch something or sell something has this moment where everything's going perfectly, where you have that feeling, and it's like,
Do you watch that show on AMC, The Pitch?
Yes.
Have you seen it before?
Yeah. That
pretty good
and
show.
Shark Tank, they're both like, you watch these things, and these people have these amazing pitches, and you listen to these, and you're like, wow, they nailed it. That was perfect.
Yeah.
And I had one of those moments doing a pitch in Australia 10 years ago, and we lost after that. And I couldn't understand. We had the better idea. We had everything perfect. And for a long time, I couldn't understand that. We wouldn't have changed anything. If we had to go back and do it again, we would have done exactly the same thing.
Yep.
It was one of those. And then a year later, I met that client. And what she told me was that we didn't lose because of the idea. We lost because they just wanted to work with the other team
Gotcha.
that pitched against us.
A
More.
personality thing.
chemistry thing. And decisions like that are made all the time.
Yep.
About people who want to work with other people because of the chemistry and not necessarily because of the spreadsheet. And if you imagine so many things in our world where we think that the thing that we have is so different from everyone else, it's going to totally stand out, right? We want to be unique. We want to have a differentiator. At the end of the day, maybe the differentiator isn't that strong, and maybe even if it is, a month later somebody can duplicate that.
Right. Price is the same way, right? I mean,
yeah.
That's the easiest thing to imitate, and a lot of people...
The best way to know if you have no trust when you walk into a situation is if the first thing somebody asks you is, how much is that?
Right.
If that's the first question, you have zero trust.
Right.
So how do we make that not the first question? Right. I think that's the challenge for any person who's trying to sell their services.
What would you say? I'd like to know that myself.
Well, I think that reputation has to precede that, right? Because when a Hollywood producer, for example, goes off and they say, I want to work on this movie, and the first person that I want to be in the movie is Julia Roberts, they're not saying, how much is she going to charge as the first question.
Right.
They're saying, that's who I want,
right,
because of the reputation of that person.
Right.
Right. So that's the reputation, and in some cases the personal brand of an individual is the ultimate way to charge more for exactly the same thing.
Sure.
Because if you don't have that, if Coke didn't have a brand, then they'd be the same price as the Safeway Select soda.
Sure. Same thing with Apple or
same thing with any
Sony or any of these.
But it works for people
perceived,
too.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks don't necessarily think in that way in terms of themselves. Certainly think that way in terms of brands. We all kind of know that.
So how do we increase our brand equity? How do we increase our value?
That's a big question. But I think that one of the ways that I've found to do that is by adding value for people before they ask for it. So one thing is somebody asks you a question, you give them an answer. The other thing is I have something valuable to share. I'm going to proactively share it so that at the moment when someone's looking for that sort of information, I'm already there. I already have it. I've already published something. I've already put it out there. I've already shared that idea.
So it goes back to blogging or whatever your platform, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking more in a content-oriented mode. So sure, that makes sense. But also, I think in real life, you have this sort of situation where you know someone in your friend circle who's an expert in something, and that person becomes the resource because you know that they do a lot of photography. And so if you're going to buy a camera, that's the person you're going to ask. The go-to guy. Yeah. And I think that's an element of reputation, right? Because you're going to trust that person's opinion. And that's been around way longer than social media.
Sure. So it's about putting yourself out there. It's about building relationships.
It's about being an expert in something.
Right.
And that something, and here's the beauty of social media, that something today doesn't have to be the same something that you do for a job. And that's what I love about social media, that we all have this. If you think about it in terms of what we studied in school, you have your major. The major is the thing that you're probably doing your career in now and you train for it. Yeah. But what about the minor? The minor in art history, or the minor in French, or the minor in whatever. The thing that you really liked but decided not to study because you probably couldn't get a job with it.
Yeah.
But now with social media, you can do that thing. That minor doesn't have to be minor anymore.
Specialize in little niches that we're talking about?
Yeah, and that's the thing that you're passionate about. And who knows, maybe that thing turns into a real opportunity. And we see this, with bloggers who've taken their individual blogs and turned it into this big thing where they can actually support their family. Not a lot of examples of that, but these are people who are taking what they're passionate about and doing something with it. That's really cool. Because a lot of people, I have the benefit of doing the sort of job that I love. I love being a marketer. I love working at Ogilvy. I love what I do. But a lot of people don't have that, right? They have a job, not a career.
Yeah.
And I think that for those people to be able to get that fulfillment from somewhere else, that's fine. I'm not the sort of guy who says, quit your job because, you should do what you always dreamed of doing.
Yeah.
You know what? We got to support ourselves.
Well, and you also have to do, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, are two different things too, right? So if I'm passionate about photography, but I suck, it's really not a good career choice to quit my day job and
that is true,
do that, right?
Yeah, that is true.
So what advice would you give, if it's not quit your job today, but what advice would you give to people who might be working for the man, or they're sort of stuck in their careers trying to figure out what to do? How do you find your passion?
Yeah.
How do you know when to jump out there, put yourself out there, or even start?
I think the biggest thing that's worked for me is you don't have to pick either or. So that's the first mental barrier you got to get past. It's not a choice of I either work for the man or I'm an entrepreneur. You can be an intrapreneur. You can be an entrepreneur on the side while you work for somebody else.
Yeah, this is a topic we've been talking about a lot recently, looking at some key people. We talked to David Armano, for example.
Yeah.
He's a good example of an entrepreneur. Talk to us more about what this means, maybe for people who didn't catch that episode or are wondering what it means.
Yeah, so what it means to me is that you have something that you're really passionate about. And my personal example is I love to write. And so my output for that was, 2 books. And I did those while working full-time for somebody else. So for me, that was launching something that I was passionate about, that I cared about, that was my own thing, while I was still working for somebody else. And the reason that I did that was because it wasn't something that I wanted to just quit my job and focus on full-time. Not only because I didn't want to, but also because I didn't need to. For me, a lot of the value of writing a book like the book that I wrote is that I'm doing this on a daily basis as a job.
Right.
I'm not just full-time going off and living in a cabin somewhere and writing about what I think the world is based on nothing.
Yeah. Did Ogilvy have any issues with that? Did you get any pushback or flack, or did you get looked at funny, like, what are you up to, or?
No, not really. I mean, they were. I think that Ogilvy as an organization has been great about understanding the value of having their employees have an opinion and be out there. And I think that that is something that's shifted in the marketing world.
Yeah. Because
marketing agencies in general, for the longest time, have been very behind the scenes. Never really talked about who they work for, what they did. And to some degree, it's still like that for certain clients and for certain types of work.
I still feel like there's a stigma. If you're up to something on the side, the company, whoever it is, whether it's HR or legal, whoever, the C-suite that stumbles onto your blog or your project, I think there's still a bit of skepticism. Like, are they really devoting 100% to our company? Are they giving it their all? Or are they off trying to get hired someplace else,
Yeah, I think, there is always going to be that.
Yeah. And how do you manage that? Internally.
Well, for me, it maybe was a little bit easier because I wasn't building a business on the side. I was launching a piece of thought leadership. And so ultimately, if the book gets into a lot of people's hands, if it results in someone saying, oh, I really like the way that guy thinks, I want to hire him to help me with my marketing. Yeah. I don't do that by myself. Right. I do that through Ogilvy.
Sure.
So there's not an inherent conflict, whereas if I was starting like a retail shop, for example, on the side, and that required more and more of my time, and that started to take me away from the job that I do, I could totally get how that would be, a tough thing, because it's all about time. Yeah. And if you start to take away time from the day job to do the side thing, that's when I think ultimately also you got to make the call that now is when I need to actually quit the job, because I'm going to do this full time, or I'm going to focus on this. Because I think this entrepreneurship intrapreneurship thing works in a certain situation, but at some point, I'm not saying anybody can launch an entire business while working for somebody else and be totally fine with it. It's a question of time, and ultimately, if your own business is really going to grow, at some point you probably have to decide to do it full time. Yeah. But with the sort of thing that I've done, which is more of a thought leadership kind of thing, I wouldn't want to write a book full time.
Yeah, and I think I love this trend. I love where this is going. The entrepreneur is it's a key role, and if everyone in the company could be visible and have a position and some sort of thought leadership, it's only in the company's best interest, right? But I think there's still this fear. The company wants to hold on to all the assets, and we want to control everything, and we don't want people running amok, or legal's not going to worry about what's Rohit going to say this week about this. And
it's not that they don't worry about that kind of stuff either, right? But I think that at some level, people are going to do what they're going to do.
Your colleagues, you ever run into any colleague conflict? You don't have to mention names, but is there any kind of resentment or thinking, oh, you've written a book, well, la-ti-da,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah, I think you're always gonna have that.
Yeah. What is that? Is that jealousy? Is it insecurity?
I think it's natural, just human behavior. Yeah. I think that also in our culture, I think that the idea of writing a book is sort of a intellectual thing.
Yeah.
So as soon
There's
as
a bit
someone
of-
has a book, it's kind of like, oh, you have a book. All
You're
right.
an author.
Yeah, you're an author. Excuse me, right?
Me too. I wrote a kid's book.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
6 pages, you know.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, yeah, big deal. You know, you did that. So I think there always is that. I don't think it's necessarily like for any one organization. I think it's all across the board. You're always going to have that.
Yeah. Have you had good luck with the relationships at the companies you've worked for?
You mean like with clients?
Yeah, no, like getting along with people in general, internally. I'm always curious about this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big priority for me. I mean, I write about that.
Yeah.
You know, so
and you are Miss Congeniality.
Yeah, and I am Miss Congeniality, as we've found out, right? So
not a problem for you.
Clearly, something's happening there.
It's a
right?
talent.
Yeah,
it's a talent.
yeah.
But I think we can take that for granted because it's not always the case. I mean, there's a lot of, gosh, I think about this example of like lobsters in a bucket, and the story I've heard about lobsters is, you don't have to put a lid on the bucket. Right, you just put a bunch of lobsters in a bucket, and the first one that tries to climb out, they could easily climb out of a shallow bucket, but the one underneath will pull them back down, just because they don't want them to get out.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of self-regulating that way. But
yeah,
sometimes I feel like companies can be that way. They don't let the stars rise.
Well, I had a perfect breeding ground, I think, to test this theory out, because living in Australia, they actually have a name for this. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. And the tall poppy syndrome is somebody who believes that they're better than anyone else.
Gotcha.
And that's very anti-Australian culture in everything. I mean, literally, if I am standing on the street and I hail a taxi and it's just me, I sit in the front seat. Why would I sit in the back? I'm not better than the driver, right? It's everything about the culture is that.
It's about equality.
It's about equality. It's
Yeah.
about, like, nobody's better than anybody else. Nobody's inherently that way. Like, we just all chip in and we just all do it. It's a very Australian thing.
Right.
So to live there for 5 years as I was starting my career, that was in my head.
Interesting.
And so to come back to America, where the culture is very much not that. I mean, if you get a promotion from, assistant to the assistant to be now just the assistant, an inter-office email gets sent saying, congratulations, you're now the assistant to the assistant instead of the whatever, right? I mean, we celebrate nothingness.
Yeah.
And that's not how Australia is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I got a promotion in my job in Australia, and I was thinking the American way, and sort of a month later, I asked him, I was like, so are we going to, like, announce this so I can get new business cards? And my boss goes to me, she goes, you didn't get new business cards already? Like, just go do it.
Yeah.
What's the problem? Why do you need an email?
No
like,
fanfare.
You got a promotion. Great job. Get new business cards if you want them.
Yeah.
What's the big deal?
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, that piece of how we celebrate that is very different here culturally. But I think for me, having started in Australia, that was a great thing, because now I didn't have that sort of expectation. So now, like, I don't need. I mean, sure, it's great if somebody sends that email and it makes me feel nice.
Yeah.
But I don't need
need the
that.
affirmation.
I don't emotionally need that.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm okay. Like, I did what I did. I have a book. I don't need to walk in and hand everybody that as my business card and say, here you go.
Yeah.
Right? I don't need to stick it in people's faces. Like, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. It's
Yeah.
okay.
The book is called Likeonomics.
Yes.
Who'd you write it for?
I wrote it for people who are struggling to go from where they are to where they want to be. Because I think that everyone faces this situation where they're in a moment where they think they have the right thing. They have the right resume to get the job. They have the right product features to have everybody buy it. And what they find is that their success isn't based on the thing. It's based on something else.
Yeah.
And what I wrote about was the something else. And the something else to me is the relationships that you have with people. Because in the world, there's something that I sort of called in the book the likability gap. And the likability gap is the difference between what somebody does for you because they have to and what they do because they want to. And that, I think, is how really the world works on everything from business to who we vote for. I mean, the whole election side of things. This really explains why we do what we do. And so that, to me, was a big, powerful idea and something that I felt like I'd learned and something that I wanted to write about. And that's what the book's about.
Talk to us about some of the mistakes that you've made along the way, so that we can get some perspective, and so that we can avoid them as well.
I'd say my biggest mistakes have been when I focused too much on myself and not enough on what someone else either needs or what someone else is going to get. So one of my favorite stories of failure, my personal failure, is when I launched a website that I thought was going to completely change the industry that I was in. It was a moment when I was living in Washington, D.C., and pretty much no restaurants had websites. And my DC changing idea, I can't say world changing, but my DC changing idea was to build websites for restaurants because I thought people would find restaurants online.
Yeah.
So I launched this business. I called it dcrestaurants.com, and I had both sides of the business figured out. One side was I would go to the restaurants and I'd say, I'm going to build you a website. Custom build, $500. The flip side was I was going to create a directory to put all of these restaurants. So now I had the destination and I had the creation. Put those pieces together, I had my business model.
Brilliant.
So I went off and I literally created a brochure and I walked door to door to restaurants. I went to an area of DC called Adams Morgan. I walked door to door at restaurants there and I told them about my great idea. And all of them said, we don't need a website. Why would we ever waste money on this thing? No need for it. So finally I got one restaurant to let me build them a website because I said I'd do it for free because I needed a case study.
Yeah.
And I
Proof
wouldn't
of
tell
concept.
anybody. Yeah, I wouldn't tell anybody that I did it for free, but I did it for free.
Okay.
And I created this one restaurant website, put that on my directory, created a directory, and I listed like the 10 other restaurants in DC that I could find that already had websites. So I put those into the directory. And then I got a meeting. I landed a meeting with a guy from AOL. And this was the time of AOL, and they're based in DC, right? So got a meeting with the AOL guy. I go in, I tell him about DC restaurants. I show him the website. I show him this stuff, and I say, look, we should partner together because you guys have all of the traffic and you could send the traffic to DC restaurants and we'll be able to monetize this thing and we'll be able to like sell advertising or whatever. And I give him my pitch, my 10-minute pitch, like the pitch, right? And I felt pretty good about my pitch, 22 years old, felt pretty good about my pitch.
Yeah.
And he says, I get why you need me. What I don't get is why I need you. And I didn't have anything to say to that. I literally just sat there. I mean, there was like crickets in the room. And what I learned from that moment was that you never, ever walk into a meeting with somebody without knowing what you can do for them.
Right.
Because if you don't have a good answer to that, you're toast.
Right.
And I was toast in that meeting. And it was a big failure for me, but it was also a big learning lesson.
Yeah.
And so to learn that pretty early, that was a big deal.
Well, we've been spending a few minutes with Rohit Bhargava. Rohit, thank you so much for being with us, sharing your words of wisdom. Best of luck with your book, Likeonomics.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.